Well, thank you all for being here. I like sessions like this because I believe the people who are in the audience are the ones who are actually interested in the topic, and I'm thrilled to be here in the midst of all of you. So as shared with you, I studied MBA, I worked in the corporate sector for quite a few years, where I have worked in the field, in the sector of hospitality, media, as well as telecom. My village is named Soda, so unfortunately it's not about making of any of the spirits, but about a village which just is called SODA. And this is in Rajasthan. It's very different from Kerala. Is there anyone here in the audience who's from outside of Kerala? Just a show of hands. Everyone's from here? Excellent. So what you have here, you guys are all blessed, because your villages, I feel, compared to other states in India, are very different from what other villages are like, right? And I'm from Rajasthan, which, as you know, is a desert state. Our challenges are huge. And our villages, unfortunately, remain neglected even as of today. The structure, again, of how the system functions and works is very different from what you are used to in Kerala, for example. And here are just certain topics. So when we speak of development, it's not just infrastructure development. I believe it's also about development of an individual from the time that he or she is born till when one passes away. And that is also a factor which I feel our system of governance needs to focus on, but often is neglected. But I feel it's pertinent because, and this is where, of course, what you do also comes into play, because if we are not creating assets for the nation, then how the hell can we possibly think about building our nation, right? Migration is rampant, will happen, especially if villages do not have the basic resources even for survival. So my village, for example, the huge challenge, if we could go to the next slide, to the fourth one, please. Our challenges were immense because the area suffers a huge drought. Okay, so the reason why I chose to become the Sarpanch, it wasn't a decision I made, it was a decision made by the village residents. And that's all thanks to the quota system. So it was supposed to be a reserved seat for women in 2010, and they needed someone who would bring in the development that they had not seen for a very long time. And 2009, unfortunately, was one of the worst drought the area had seen. It's an agrarian economy, and of course, if you can, that's not very visible, but that's the water sample report, which states that all water in the village is declared unsafe, even for the purpose of irrigation. So if it's bad for plants, you can't sow plants, then how the hell can human beings survive drinking that water? Plus, I realized that the Down syndrome in my village was extremely high. And I did some research online, but a lot of papers have been written stating that intake of contaminated water can lead to Down syndrome as well. So that's the kind of challenges that we were facing. So given the fact that there was drought, the groundwater naturally contaminated and extremely saline. So much so, if you have a cup of tea, you would think that the person who's giving you the tea, instead of putting sugar, has probably put 6 dollops full of salt in it. That's how saline it is, right? And that's what we survive on. So while every aspect, from infrastructure development to improving quality of education to improving or providing health services and so on and so forth, if we did not have the drought, I really would not have known where to begin. But given the fact that the basic resource for survival after air being water wasn't present, obviously that became our priority. So that's where my journey of heading a panchayat began, and that's the aspect we struggled to work with, but I must say we were successful. It was challenging because while the government has a lot of funding in the name of panchayat, or rather rural development, but how it is sanctioned, the guidelines, the framework of the guidelines, and the inability of the system to be flexible within those guidelines because they weren't used to doing things differently, helped provide for me immense resistance because they were not used to someone asking them questions. They weren't used to having someone shake them up and say, hey, you're doing your job to help us in villages, but that was not happening. So again, instead of supporting me, I faced huge pushback. And of course, it's also a very patriarchal society. So one, I was very young in 2010. I believe I'm still young. And on top of that, a woman, on top of that, a single woman who was questioning largely men sitting in those offices who were much older than me, and they did not like it. So, but despite the challenges, I loved what I did. I was the sarpanch for 10 years. That's 2 terms, 1 term being of 5 years. And I'm guessing from that you'd be able to tell I must have done some good work that the village residents wanted me to continue again into the next term. They wanted me to contest again for the 3rd term, which surprisingly was a reserved seat for women again. The 2nd term was a general seat, which means anyone could contest, man, women, irrespective of which segment of the society in terms of caste. And so given the fact that it was reserved seat for women again, in a way, I took that as a compliment, because that meant that probably the grassroots bureaucracy at the district level also wanted me to continue, because that's how they get to showcase that in our district there is a panchayat where work is happening, and they can showcase that development and being the first ones to have done something in panchayats in their district. So the momentum did build up, but it took time. And if you can go to the next slide, please. So coming back to the challenge, right? So when we don't have safe drinking water, this is how we survive. We don't have pipeline connectivity. The water we're drinking are from open ponds, open wells, and there's no treatment plant. So you can imagine what kind of contamination, what kind of health issues that must be bringing in. We had no sanitation. There were very few houses which had toilets. And the funny thing was that while the government, while organizations such as UNICEF had that as their priority, but they were not able to meet the numbers that they needed to do as per their targets. But I realized that essentially was because they were sending men into the field, and a woman will not talk about her intimate issues and challenges with an absolute stranger, especially if that stranger is a man. So when I tried to find solutions to the water and sanitation problems, because I realized that more than 70% of the health issues were because of our intake of contaminated water and no sanitation. So I was reaching out to NGOs, to experts in the field, and when I met the head of the UNICEF for the state, he was shocked and surprised that my village residents had actually come forward to me saying that they wanted toilets. And I told him that, listen, the reason why my village residents are asking for toilets, where women are demanding the toilets, is because they have a woman in the leadership role who they feel comfortable talking about these issues to. And you will never be able to bridge that challenge till you don't get women in the field to do the surveys, to create the awareness programs. So, and through that, I realized that what may to us seem obvious is actually not obvious. You have to spell it out, you have to state it out, no matter how simple it may be. But it may not necessarily strike the other person, especially when we're coming from privileged societies or backgrounds such as ours. So we may take a whole lot of things for granted. For example, water. Because we have easy access to water, we will not easily understand what someone who doesn't have that access to what he or she may go through, what not having toilets possibly means, especially for women who are waiting for the shelter of darkness to relieve themselves, which means you have the entire day for hours that you do not, or hold yourself back from going to the toilet because you do not have a toilet. And as a result, a whole lot of health issues, more so for the women than for the men, because men don't have so much of an issue bearing the back to the public. That's a stupid joke. You can laugh at that. So basically, that was what my journey was. And I know there's paucity of time. How much time is the session for? Oh, 1 hour. Okay. So are you going to be my timekeeper? How many more minutes?
Actually, the time was from 11 to 12.
Yeah.
We have, now the time is 11:26.
Oh, okay, fine. So I will try and wrap up. So my first term, what I focused on was providing the basic amenities, ensuring that the basic infrastructure at least was available, where we, of course, began with, next slide, please, began with working towards ensuring we had safer drinking water available. So for that, we did what are limited resources. Just to put things in perspective, in all of 2010, my panchayat, which has residents to the tune of 10,000 people, we had 20 lakhs of funding that came into the panchayat kitty for the entire year. Please do the math and figure out how great that amount really is. Yep. Have I been able to put that in perspective? 10,000 people, whole lot of things to take care of, and only 20 lakhs for the entire year, which doesn't come into our kitty. When I'm saying kitty, means the panchayat bank account at one go. It came at different intervals, and we did not know when that would be. Right? We had no prior information when the next piece of funding would come into our account. So how do you plan? And how do you get things done? So had I just depended on the government, I don't think I would have been successful in bringing about the development that we were able to showcase and bring about in my village. So I reached out to the private sector, and that's where my work in the corporate sector helped. I reached out to a lot of individuals, and how that happened was, luckily, media was very kind, because I believe I broke the stereotype of what a sarpanch is traditionally like, and that's how they wrote about me. And because they wrote about me, the people in the private sector heard about me, and I was called to for speaking engagements where I would tell them that, listen, we need money, and donate or adopt a project and bring us the expertise that we need. Because I realized that as a leader, I'm not an engineer, I'm not an educationist, I'm not a doctor, and if I have to construct roads, if I have to fix a reservoir, that by the way is the main reservoir, our lifeline, and as you can see, the amount of silt, right? It barely had the capacity to hold rainwater, to harvest water. So of course I used my logical mind and thought the best thing to do was desilt it so that the basin increases and the capacity for the reservoir to hold water increases. But the government did not have the funds to allow us to do that. On top of that, we are not allowed to use machinery. So our reservoir, next slide please, covers an area of 100 acres, okay? And to desilt that manually, even if my entire village came together to try and desilt it, we wouldn't have been able to do it even in a span of 10 years because of the expanse, because of the hardness of the soil, and the depth that needed to be dug out. We needed machinery. But even in the 21st century, unfortunately, machinery is prohibited for rural development. And I thought that was very unfair, because when we look at development in the cities, you're importing machinery from outside. But rural development, no. However, the government was kind enough to say, well, while we cannot provide you the funding, feel free to reach out and raise your funds, which I said I will do. So they said, with that funding, whatever you want to do, feel free to. But you cannot possibly have existing funding, say for example through NREGA, which is funding for usage of manual labor, and machinery being done at the same time. Despite my telling the government that, hey, deploy someone from your department to monitor, to ensure that there is no mixing of the funds. And yet they said, sorry, we can't. So I realized that this is going to be a tough game, because while I had limited time before the monsoons, it also meant that if I have to follow the guidelines and not get the support that I needed, this would take longer than what I had anticipated. However, through the private sector and through my speaking engagements, many people, especially individuals, came forth and donated, because of which I was able to do the work that I did. However, my initial funding, because my district has no industries, so the challenge was huge, because the initial companies that I went to and PSUs I went to said, we are not anywhere close to your village, and therefore we will not be able to help you. Which was sad, because these are companies who were selling the products and services in our villages, making our already thin pockets thinner, but did not want to give back. And I realized how difficult it must be for villages who are so far removed from the urban setup, and who's there to help them, and how do we create awareness to bring that change that our country needs. So the main reason why I agreed to become the Sarpanch was because of this gap. While we believe on papers there's a lot of funding, what actually comes down to the ground is actually very little. But that is something what majority of the people would not know till you don't start working there, as I started doing. And I also want to, and still want to continue creating the awareness, because there's still a huge gap. And also in terms of not just lack of funding, but also in terms of lack of expertise. So people like you and I, if we come together, collaborate, which is something unfortunately we do not do enough of. If we collaborate and bring in the expertise, connect the dots, then I see no reason why the face of our nation will not change, and will change very, very fast. I believe if I had gotten that support, forget 10 years, I would have been able to deliver within 3 years. But how do you bridge that gap is the question I'm going to leave you with, and hoping that you will spread that message to have more people like us come forth in helping villages across the country to improve the nation and the face of the nation, and this growth story that we are talking about. What I find really ironic is that at one end we are talking about AI, we're talking about technology taking over and improving our lives, and on the other, what does technology really mean? In villages like mine, where people are still living in mud houses, to them technology is constructing a concrete brick and mortar house. That for them is technology. So you can see how far behind our rural spaces are compared to where we in big cities are. And I think that is very unfair. We have high school where so the 11th and 12th grade students are only taught, pay attention, Hindi, literature, Sanskrit, and geography. Nothing else. So what asset creation are we doing for the nation? Are we being fair? I don't think so. And I'm sure Archana would also point out, since it's about reading, that as per surveys, which happen time and time again, the result continues to remain the same, that kids in 6th and 8th grade still struggle to read and write properly. So can we fix that? Because I believe that each individual has a right to dignity, each individual has a right to earn the respect that we all deserve. And that can only happen if we come together as a collective force and make that change happen. And it's not difficult, believe you me. Given a choice, I think, when people ask me, would I do it again? Hell yes, I would do this all over again, but perhaps do it better, because when I became the Sarpanch in 2010, it wasn't my decision, so I didn't get time to do homework, right? But now, I know where I'm at, and if I were to do it all over again, I at least have the basic knowledge to ensure that I don't waste the kind of time that I did, and hopefully be able to deliver much more. I'm just going to end by saying there's much more that I'd love to share, but that's to give you a perspective of where we were at, and this without government funding. My initial seed money, as I like to call it, came from within my family, because as I said, no companies and nor the government was willing to help us. So that's when my father turned around and said, don't lose hope. We will sell whatever limited assets we have, but you stay focused. And bless my parents for that. Because then I realized I can't just put the burden on my parents, and reached out to my dad's friends and my friends, and within 4 days. So I got elected in Feb of 2010. I was running pillar to post till May. I only had 1 month left before the monsoons began, and I realized that was very little time. And then I realized, okay, I cannot possibly burden my parents alone, so I reached out to my own network. And while I had been chasing different people and companies and governments for that many months, got not a single rupee, when I turned and looked inwards, within 4 days, we collected 10 lakhs. And with that, we did the desilting, and just in time. And luckily, God was kind. The first shower of 2010 was so good that within 1 day, our reservoir filled up. And that is what provides, even as of today, that's what provides water for the entire year, for not just the people, but also for our animals to survive. And that has also resulted, something as simple and small as that. Riktushna, if you can get to the slide which shows the entire reservoir. That's that map. So this bit of funding I wasn't able to desal the entire reservoir. I was only able to desal 10 acres. Mind you, just 10 acres of the 100 acres, as you can see there. And the green circles are the islands we created, because I'm also very passionate about climate change, biodiversity, and so on and so forth. So we created these islands as a safe haven for the migratory birds that had stopped coming our way, because they did not have that space any longer. And just with that intervention, not only was water being provided for, but agriculture produce increased by 65 to 70%. So you can imagine that had I been successful in desilting the entire reservoir, what transformation that would have brought to the village. And so from my perspective, not enough. Of course, eventually, in 2014, many other companies came forth, and we were able to desilt much more, twice of that. And so life is a whole lot better. And this is where I'll end and give you your time, is by saying that from my perspective, I thought my interventions were not enough, not to the scale that I had visualized in my first term. And despite that, and I think this is perhaps the best compliment anyone can ever get, especially when you're in politics, where a man who was in the opposition, and luckily for me, because I'm very inclusive, and I follow what is referred to as servant leadership, where I feel that as a leader, you basically are more like a parent, and therefore you have to be inclusive. And when you are like that, people join you. And I think that's how I was able to receive my best compliment ever, where this gentleman who was in the opposition came and sat. So this is what I would do. I would tell them, listen, you're as much part of the village, and my doors and my team's doors are open to you at any given point of time that you want to step in and work with the rest of the village in all the projects that we are looking at carrying out. So somewhere that message was heard, and whenever someone would come visit the village, if one of those guys were around, I would force them, and like, you're the one who's going to introduce the outsider to what our village is all about. So on one such occasion, the man didn't even give two hoots about the gentleman who was visiting us, but turned to me and said that while in our own village, I would never admit and never say anything nice about you, because, mind you, I am your opposition and I will remain your opposition. However, it's with immense pride that when I go to other villages and towns, I tell them that what you have done in these 5 years, no minister has done even in a span of 50 years. So you can imagine what that impact must have been for the village residents. And I'm proud of the fact that I was able to bring it to them, and wish that I can inspire many more of you. Thank you. To also join us in that step forth of building our nation. Thank you. Over to you.
So I was under the impression, or at least that's what I understood, that we would be having a dialogue about transforming soda, but a lot of things that I wanted to talk to you about, you've already covered so beautifully. So thank you so much for that. The one thing that I wanted to bring up, that again you did touch upon, was that a lot of difficulty that you seem to face when you approach, say, private people or just people like us, seems to come from this extreme urban-rural divide. Like if I ask the audience, when was the last time we've actually come across words like panchayat, panchayati raj, and known what is happening, what is really the actual picture at grassroots level, right? And I think, and we are sitting in Kerala, which is known for being one of the most educated states, not just primary level, college, masters, it's really, really into education. But beyond education and knowledge, how aware are we? And I feel like a lot of the struggle you face, that you spoke about when you approach, say, private companies or private players in itself, comes from a lack of this complete grassroots awareness as to how different is what we perceive as problem and what actually is the problem on ground level. And I've also heard you speak about, when you were talking about getting funds sanctioned, or even when the funds did get sanctioned, that there was a difference between what you wanted it sanctioned for versus what it was actually sanctioned for. So I feel like that a huge lack of awareness exists, considering we are such a huge agrarian society and the village, the rural part, forms such a big part of our lives. What do you feel can be done to bridge that gap? Because we're all studying our subjects in college, we're all studying our arts and sciences and professional degrees and all that, but at some point we are very, very disconnected from the actual picture of the country itself. So what do you feel about that,
from my perspective,
Yes.
invite me more to sessions like these. But yeah, there is that huge gap, and I would reach out to media, and I understand some of our media friends are here as well, that I think there has to be greater awareness created. And one thing that I feel that reaches out to every nook and corner across the country, be it the rural space or the urban space, is the information through media.
Yes.
But I think social media is also, now that we have the digital India, Kerala, of course, I think from what I've heard, has done well. I struggled initially also because I did not have access to internet in my village the first few years, right? So how do you reach out to the world outside? So I think social media is also a great platform. I know it's something that I need to also do. Having worked there, I don't write enough, and I do want to start doing that. But I feel that whenever we're looking at, the budget was just passed as of yesterday, and when we're reading these things, when you're hearing about these things, I would just say that all of you just reach out to the government through social media and ask these pertinent questions, because I feel unless until we don't ask, the change will not happen, and we don't ask enough. I know there's a lot of fear, but there is also the beauty of anonymity in the web space. So let's tap into that. And one of the key things to create this awareness that I really have been wanting to do, and again struggling with, is to get our high school students and educational colleges, right, institutions, be it the engineering, architecture, management, name it, all of it. So instead of internship, I feel that our students should go to villages, and it's going to be a win-win. So for example, if I were an architect or an engineer and I got to go to a village and interact with the villagers, understand what the need is, then I as a student will realize that I, despite of my age, assuming I'm a student, have the potential to transform and improve someone else's life. Just imagine the amount of confidence and kick it's going to give me, and also instill in me that empathy, right, to actually understand how privileged we are with the access that we have, and what the reality of the majority of people across the country really is. And I think it's all about creating that empathy, which cannot be taught. It has to be seen, it has to be felt. Your heart needs to open up to it. And I think all of us have that heart. Somewhere when we grow older and get caught up in the rat race, we get a little too rational and don't listen to our heart. We don't listen to our gut. But I think it's all about keeping that open, keeping us alive, and not numbing ourselves, which I often see is also what creates a lot of sorrow. Sorry, I'm going to digress. But what I'm coming to is that if we can make that connect happen, so it's a win-win in terms of the student learning something. And I have a lot of students who reach out to me, but these are students who want to study abroad because it's going to give them credits, right? And I think it's changing within India, but that change is still a little too slow. So I wish people would realize, students and the parents of students and teachers would realize that this is something that the students can benefit from. And what I've done in my village when we've had students like that come in, and I've run many programs, so a lot of university students from Delhi University would come and stay with us during summers for an entire month, and the winter break would be 15 days is when they would come back. So we had a sort of a flow in terms of the continuity of the program. And what I ensured was that we got the rural youth also involved, because that's how you blur the divide, right? Because they would hesitate saying that, oh, we can't speak in English, or I don't know how to use the computer. And I would turn around and tell them, oh, but you know so much more. And just interact with these students coming from cities and you will understand. So we formed mixed groups. So, and then these students would go out into the field, because I would tell them, don't just listen to me, because it's my perspective. I want you to engage with the village residents. And to me, it didn't matter even if there was someone who wasn't happy with what I was doing. But that way, I would also get inputs, because to me, they probably would not say that, hey, I don't think you've done this project properly, or that you're probably missing this out. So I needed that input as well. So for me, it was perfect. And when these students started going to the hamlets and to the rural households together, and all I told the city-bred students was that since you may not necessarily understand the local dialect, this is where I want you to involve the local youth. And it was beautiful because what happened with that was that the urban kids and the rural kids started ideating together. And suddenly they realized that they were at par with each other, right? And with that, the outcome, because I would tell them that now I want you to make a presentation where each student in the group has to present, as in make the presentation. So that way, the kids who were not used to speaking, mostly rural kids, also gained that confidence, seeing that their peers from cities were also the ones who were sort of empowering them and encouraging them. So it was really nice to see how certain arrogance that came with some of the kids from cities, also to see how beautifully and on its own the humility came in, right? So I'm just citing an example of how that transformation can happen so quickly. But that is something that we don't realize, because a lot of people turn around and tell me that changing mindsets is difficult, but I don't think so. When it's done honestly, when those conversations happen like how you and I are having a conversation, people open up, and that's how trust builds in. But often I see that there is, with education, with degrees, comes an element of arrogance where we feel we know more, but that's not true. A lot of the projects that I've been able to do, if it weren't for the inputs that I received from within the village, I don't think I would have been successful at all. And people realized that. In my village, people realized that. And I think not only from the fact that I was able to deliver in terms of the transmission of the reservoir, I was able to do that within 6 months of coming into office. So suddenly they realized, okay, this girl's going to make a difference. But also they realized that I was inclusive and I was open to ideas, and I wanted to hear, and I wanted them to participate, and I wanted to do this collectively. And that's how that support that I received from within the village. If you can go to the community initiatives, just go to that slide. We were able to do a lot of work where we didn't even need to spend money because we didn't have it. Because people said, for example, when we're doing infrastructure development, next one. Okay, just go back. I can't see it. So when we were doing expansion of roads, so we had these electric poles which needed to be shifted. So obviously I reached out to the electricity department, just having this example and coming back to you. I feel like there's so much to share. So, so the electricity department said, oh, we need lakhs of rupees. And it made no sense. There were just 5 electricity poles that needed to be shifted, and we didn't have that kind of money. So luckily for us, the lineman, who does the basic tweaking, he was from our village alone. So he said, what I can help you with is, I'll cut off the main supply. All I need is a tractor and a rope and some folks to help me, and I'll make this happen for our village. I said, fantastic. So I reached out to the village folks. There was one guy who brought his tractor, and there were men around there. So obviously I would oversee the project work and project site myself. We got someone to bring the rope, and we dug pits where the poles needed to go, and the guy turned off the supply. He knew how to do this, and we moved the poles ourselves and replace them and install them where they needed to be installed without spending a single rupee, right? So that's the beauty of the community initiatives, and that's the beauty of the inputs you receive from people around. And anyway, in any sector, even in the corporate sector, for example, I feel it is very, very important to work as a collective force and not have a top-down approach, but more of a, if you look at it, it's the flatter organization that always do far better in terms of the performance, in terms of low attrition, in terms of that connectivity within, and the strength that comes from it. And there's so many examples in terms of just organizations that I can speak of that my heart melts just to think about it. And the same thing applies. A lot of people also usually ask me that how did the transformation from the private sector to a village happen? And I'm like, why do you think it's any different? Because if you're looking at a village, it's like an organization. I have to look at manpower, managing, so sort of HR. I have to look at the finances, the administration, overseeing projects. So it actually is not very different. The only difference is that, yes, the private sector is very organized, and the rural scape is perhaps the most unorganized sector that can possibly be. And I think that's all that the difference really is.
I just had something to. I actually had that point to discuss with you where usually the question, you are reading my mind, usually the questions would be how did you shift, or how did that, I've been asked how do you shift from corporate to doing something like this, and I don't think of it as a shift, and I think that thought itself creates a hesitation when we want to do something different, or we all have some passion or some dreams inside, and we feel like, okay, shifting from something that I worked towards for so many years to something else now might feel like I'm leaving something behind, but I think it's all about the perspective. Working in corporates teaches us a lot of skills. It teaches us people management, time management, dealing with difficult clients, thinking on your feet. And if we take that as a learning experience and then put it into whatever you want to do next, be it entrepreneurship, be it social work, be it anything, you haven't left anything behind, or your past is not like a wasted effort. It is still one step further. And if you ask her, I'm sure there'll be a lot of things that corporate gave us that we could now use and probably be better because of that. So that perspective that we usually get asked about, how did you shift, how is it dealing with it, it was not really, it was actually just one step further. So one thing I wanted to ask you is, we've been talking about mindset shift, right? I've heard you speak about how it was not that difficult for you because the people chose you and saw you as a daughter of the village. Do you feel like that has had an impact on the general perspective that we have about how women are usually treated in villages, in the rural setting, in terms of, say, women liberty or choices? Do you feel like, because you are such a shining example in the village of what a woman can achieve if she sets her heart to it, has that changed the perspective of how the younger girls in the village, especially because changing the mind of the elders is usually much tougher than, reaching the youngsters? So do you feel like that has happened?
Absolutely. And I think through my experience, I'd say changing the mindset of the elders has not been tough either.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, I'm going to, probably it may sound a little repetitive. I feel that when conversations like these happen, right, when you're respectful of each other and you're not threatening the other, and are showing, and you show empathy. So that's where I guess the concept of inclusiveness in its true self stems from. When that happens, then that transformation, even in terms of the shift of the mindset, happens, and it happens that quickly. And I'm going to take the liberty of citing an example. So I don't know if you showed the initial slide, but my first term, we were so it's a team of 12 people, including me, where 8 were women and 4 men, okay? And I knew that often it's proxy leadership, which means that instead of the woman who's been elected, it's the man who probably would run the show. And as expected, that's pretty much what it was. Apart from me, I think there were just only 3 or 4 other women who showed up in office when our first meeting was being conducted. So I turned around to the respective husband of the women who were actually elected and looked at them and said that if you wanted to sit here in the office, then you should have contested the election, but you got your wife to do so don't you think she should be here? And I don't know why, but I also told them, because apart from me and one other man who was a graduate, there was one other guy who had studied till the 7th grade and then dropped out. The others could not read or write, they could only sign their name, okay? So I knew that literacy would pose a hindrance in terms of the inputs I'm going to receive from the team that I was working with. And I just told these men that even if I want a document signed by my colleagues in the panchayat, I would not want them to do it blindly, that I would want them to call someone they trust. So it could be their children, it could be the husband, could be the brother-in-law, sister-in-law, whoever was educated in the family, whoever they trusted. I would want them to bring that person, understand what's written in the document, and only after understanding, sign it. That's all I said. And again, I repeat, I have no idea where that came from, except for just that general understanding that, okay, there are a lot of them who would not be able to understand what we're signing. So just having said that, within 5 minutes, all the elected women folks were in the office. And I actually thought that their respective husband would also sit along with, but not a single one sat. And I realized that the reason that happened was because in that statement where I said, even if I want a signature, I don't want them to do it till they've not understood what's on the document, is where they realized that here was someone who would ensure that the women's position as an elected representative would not be misused. Her power will not be misused. So I think I was able to gain that trust within that one day. And then I realized in at least our panchayats, people may know who the sarpanch is, but they may at best know who the head of their ward or their area is, the elected representative, but would not know who the other team members in the panchayat are. And so we decided that we're going to go do rounds of the entire village thanking the folks for having chosen us. And I told the ward elected representative that I'm not going to do the talking. You are the ward head. You do the thanking and you introduce the rest of us to the village residents. So the women were like, oh, we've never spoken before. And these are women who are married into the village, so they do not have the freedom to step out and interact even with the neighbors sometimes, right? So they were very hesitant. So I said, doesn't matter, I'll stand behind you, I'll whisper in your ear, whatever I say, you just say it out loud. I just had to do it with the first two women. And of course, day one, you can't cover the entire village in one day. At about 4 o'clock, the deputy sarpanch, the next in line to me, happened to be a woman. Her husband called saying that I want my woman back home to cook. I said, no problem. So I packed them in my car, then dropped everybody to their respective houses. Next day, we were out in the field again. The same man calls, okay? His wife did not have a phone, so I was going to pass on the phone to her, and he said, no, don't give her the phone. I'm just calling, and do let her know, and I want you to know as well, that today, either I'll get my neighbor to help, or I will cook myself. This is the man talking. I will cook myself, and you guys be in the field as long as you want, even if that means being out till 1 a.m., 2 a.m., doesn't matter. Just go on doing what you're doing. This is day 2. And this is the man who's older than me, okay? And in a patriarchal society where men don't do stuff with the household. It's the woman's job to cook, right? So again, like, that's what I'm trying to say through this example, that changing mindset is not that difficult. And yes, my being in the leadership role, I think, again, another example that I'd take as one of the best compliments. So, of course, girl child, the biases exist, and there's this woman who has 4 daughters and 1 son, the son being the youngest, and a widow. And she said this to one of the journalists who had come into our village, saying that after seeing Chhavi take on this leadership role, I realized how important it is, even for women and girls, to be on their own feet. And marriage need not necessarily be the end-all and the end-all. And I would want my daughters to be financially independent before they get married. And for a widow in a society like that to say that, I thought was a big thing. And not just within my panchayat, a lot of unknown, like people I'd never met. So my number was easily accessible, being a public figure, elected representative. And I've had calls from people from distant villages, different districts across the state, where they've reached out to me saying that, will you please speak to our parents? We don't want to get married yet. We want to finish studying. And please speak to my parents. And I have always, without even knowing these people, and of course spoken to the parents, essentially the father, because he's the decision maker, and just said to him that, hey, listen, from what your daughter says, her record's good, in academics she's pretty good, can you just think of her graduation as a further investment into her future, and tomorrow if she gets the degree and then needs to apply for a job, just think, do the math. She may get $800 now, but post her graduation or whatever degree she's choosing to get, it'll be 20,000 and more. And think of the respect she's going to earn from the family that she's going to get married into tomorrow. So that's about all that I had to say. And every intervention that I've had, the student has been allowed to continue to study. So yeah, I'm very proud to say that there has been that impact, not just within my village, not just amongst women, but even the men, because we've had these open discussions where I tell men that, hey, you need to know about menstrual hygiene, because you need to understand what your women in your household are going through. It's okay if, as a father, if the mother's not around, if your daughter needs sanitary pads, who is she going to reach out to? You should be there for her. So we've had those conversations. And when I had these university students come in, we would get the boys to talk about menstrual hygiene and tell them that, hey, you go talk to the men and do it in the absence of women, so they don't feel like, they're not uncomfortable. Women are not made to feel uncomfortable. So these open conversations made them realize how inclusive we were. For women who were not able to find their footing, I would tell them, do not be aggressive. You don't have to fight the men in your household. If you don't get the support from within your family, reach out to your neighbors, to your relatives. You will get that support, but try and work with rather than work against. And likewise for men, try and get them to understand and be sensitized towards the pains of what a woman goes through, why having multiple, and what the negative effect of having multiple children, what that has on a woman's body, or child marriage, what happens to the daughter if she gets pregnant way too early, if she's been a young bride. So just by talking about these things, things change. Like within the first 9 months itself, child marriages in my village stopped. So that was a big win. So yes, transformation is not difficult. Changing mindsets is not difficult if we can be respectful of each other and just do so with an open heart and an open mind.
Thank you so much. I think we are kind of in conclusion.
Yes.
So the one thing that I wanted to focus on here was when we talk about a story like transforming soda, it's not just the infrastructure. The amount of work that someone like Chhavi has put in for the infrastructure is mind-boggling. But along with the infrastructural changes, the mindset changes that will now impact so many future generations. The kids of the women that Chhavi has impacted. That is huge, and that is something all of us can do. So when we work with children, when we talk about, the one thing we focus on is beyond education. Right, beyond your studies, what else can we think about? It's about awareness about things like mental health, awareness about what's happening in your country, what is your interest, where do you think your interest can be focused on? And I think everything that I feel that you stand for and that you've achieved is such a shining example of, because I think one of the biggest issues again comes back to the urban-rural divide. When we think about a panchayat or a panchayat head, we think about this village elder, this patriarch who will sort of take all the decisions. And then when we think about a modern woman, an educated woman, or man for that matter, who's worked in corporates, who's done an MBA and then worked in corporates and all of that, we don't put them together. But I think bridging that gap through awareness and conversations and education is the solution to what everything that Chhavi has, achieved. And it's not just one village. The impact is so much more widespread. So yeah, I think we'll conclude here. I've been getting nods that we are running out of time. Thank you so much for all of you for being here as well.